Good evening, everyone. We're now going to begin this evening's Planning, Transport and Regeneration Committee. I will remind everyone that we are being filmed and it will end up on the Council's website, so if you've got a problem with that, then please leave now. We'll go to the agenda. First item is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Gledhill and Councillor Hebb is subbing instead. Have we received any other apologies?
Thank you, Chair. No further apologies.
So the next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Do we have any particular comments on those minutes? No. Okay. We can agree those. The next item is item divergent business, and I've not agreed to any, so we'll move to declarations of interest. Item 4. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Hebb.
Thank you, Chair. Well, both agenda items have things relevant to my ward, so while I don't have an interest per se, I just thought I'd register that point.
Thank you.
Sorry, Alex.
Councillor Kelly.
Yeah, in relation to the Stamford interchange, I'm employed by London Gateway, but as the reports just for noting, yeah, it was just really a declaration in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move to the first report of the evening. It's the fees and charges found on page 9, and I'll go to Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this report sets out proposed fees and charges for the next municipal year. The main body of the report explains the approach to the various fees across a number of service areas, but the detailed breakdown itemised is on the appendix, which has been printed out for members. We have a number of officers on Teams this evening because there's quite a few services represented, so if there's any questions, hopefully we'll be able to answer those. But in terms of recommendations, there's 2 recommendations set out on page 10. Chair, the report otherwise is as written, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lee. First question from me. I just wanted to check my understanding of something. It seems in this report, when it comes to permit parking, there's a proposal to introduce a fee of £10 for residents for their first resident permit and £20 for their second permit. So I just want to double check. This is for residents living, at their home in the borough somewhere. They happen to be in a sort of parking permit area, and we're going to ask them to pay for their resident permits. Is that correct?
Chair, if it's possible, I can direct that question to the strategic lead for enforcement, Phil Carver. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, Chair and Councillors. Yeah, so the proposal is to introduce a small fee of £10 payable by residents for the first resident permit and £20 for the second permit, and the third permit to increase by £5 from £75 to £80 for 23-24. We've benchmarked and with neighbouring boroughs, and our proposal is still considerably lower for each permit. But that's quite correct.
Okay, thank you for the response, Phil. I have to say, though, just on a fundamental level, I'm not comfortable charging residents a fee, however small, to park outside their own home. I just don't think it's right. I can understand a small increase in maybe visitor permits, but I'm not very comfortable supporting the idea that we're going to charge people, as I say, however small, a fee to park outside their own home because they happen to live in a parking permit area. I know that's more a comment and not a question. I'll let you respond to that if you want, but otherwise I will go to other members of the committee.
So I didn't know if you asked me to respond to that. I can respond if you like.
No, please do. It was an invitation.
Okay, so thank you. So basically, the main thing here is what I would like to be noted is that any increases that's proposed, any income is all ring fenced. It goes back into the service for line signs, resurfacing. It's about keeping the upkeep of the service that we provide for the residents. We've not increased parking permits before for the first or the second. And we thought it was a good idea so we can get ahead in terms of the maintenance side of things as well. And whilst we're looking at inflation, but what we're trying to say is whilst inflation hits us in terms of having to pay an increase in line, signs and servicing, and this is part of the reason why we're proposing these small fees. Thank you.
Thank you for the response, Phil. I will go straight to Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a quick question, because I can't find it amongst all these charges. If you're going to introduce that fee, how much revenue will be coming into the council to compensate that? And secondly, I think we need to be mindful that we are entering into a cost of living crisis. We're already in it, but it's not going to come to light properly until next year. So the £10 or £20 that you want may, for you'd think of nothing, but to somebody that's something else on their gas or electric bill right now. So can you just, first of all, tell me how much revenue is going to be made out of this? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. It is in the report. If it's approved, it would be on average of 75% of residents. It would be around 37,910 for the first permit. The second permit would be around 15,160, so £15,160. And I'm sorry, the second question broke up. I didn't really catch the second part.
I think my second question is, I'm in a bit of the camp like Councillor Anderson right now, that I don't think it's appropriate right now to put any additional charges into residents when we're going into a cost of living crisis. I know it's only £10 or £20. That £10 or £20 can be on somebody's electric or gas bill that they will need. At the moment, the council is setting up warm spaces and places like that. So to start doing additional costs at this moment in time, I think is probably not appropriate just now.
Phil, did you?
Sorry, I do apologise, Councillor. I heard what you said, but I didn't catch the actual question. If I heard correctly, you're saying you don't feel it's appropriate to increase the charges at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate for the charges to come on. And I think going forward, if we keep having problems with ICT, officers probably need to be in the meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll move on to any other questions.
I've got different questions.
Councillor Raper.
Just something on the executive summary at the beginning on page 9. You talk about further director delegated authority will be sought via the Cabinet to allow fees and charges to be varied within a financial year. Do you think at this moment in time it's good that it only goes to Cabinet? We're being told constantly that the Cabinet are seeking to have an ethos of openness and transparency. Should not any additional changes to charges come for scrutiny first?
Lee?
Thank you, Chair. So the second recommendation on page 10, at the very end of that 1.2, sets out that for delegated authority is only in response to legal or regulatory requirements only. So it's not seen as being an open door for changes to be made in year, as opposed to a response to a specific legal or regulatory requirement. If that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roper.
First of all, I've got a comment. Visitors' permits and parking permits, residents' parking permits. I'm still getting residents complaining that the only way of getting them is online. In my ward, there's quite a lot of people who struggle to use online services. Some can't afford to have it, and so on. We do have a few people who have come into the library to use the facilities there, but that's not practical if you want a permit straight away. So that's just a comment, because we're saying it's more flexible, but it's excluding some people. And then my next question, which is a question, if we go to page 12, you're talking about, in particular, the pre-planning application and the planning performance agreement charges. Will the fact that we may have insufficient staff limit our ability to offer such services? That's part one. Secondly, are the payments that come in ring-fenced so that they're only used for planning? I know it does say that somewhere else, but is there evidence that that currently it is being used to ensure additional staff can be brought in to facilitate the performance? Thank you.
Thank you. If I can answer that question. So the second part of the question about the ring fencing, yes, if that fee comes in for the pre-applications, it will be kept within the planning team to support the planning team and grow the planning team where possible. So yeah, it will be kept within the service to provide improvements. I think that possibly answers your first question as well. Because the money is ring fenced, it will be kept in the team. So that will allow the team potentially, with those fees going up, to provide extra staff and to sort of provide extra resources to deal with cases more quickly. So yeah, it's probably the similar answer to both questions, to be honest.
Thank you. Just to follow up then, is that what's been happening at the moment?
Yeah, the fees for the planning pre-application service are kept within the service, and the planning performance agreements, those are being used to pay for additional officers to support the establishment staff. That's correct, yes.
Thank you, because I know they're very hard working, but we need to support our staff as well. Thank you.
Councillor Hebb.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for those that have put this report together. In no particular order, the issue with residence permits, and I do need to caveat that as a permit holder myself, I'll just sort of put that one back out there again, that there is a paradox here, that the reason that permits exist is to deter those from making savings in terms of car parking charges and commuting and stuff like that by parking outside residents' properties close to the station. You know, going on Councillor Raper's point around her own constituents, mine as well, that the reason why those protections are in place for local residents to stations is to stop people over disproportionately parking outside properties and causing inhibition to those that live there. Should they pay for that? I don't think so. You know, again, I do caveat the point that I have a permit holder myself. But that's not the point. That is the paradox. I suppose my questions are, I mean, obviously, suffice to say that I don't support such an approach for the reason I've just outlined. But in terms of consultation, can I ask what considerations are being given in terms of consultation? Because the paragraph associated with this report seems particularly light. I'd like to know, I don't know if Councillor Raper has had any engagement in this thus far?
No.
No, I haven't.
So could I have a little bit of detail on that, please?
Phil? Did you catch that, Phil?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last bit. I heard about consultation.
What consultation has taken place? The report is quite light on. I mean, have ward councillors been consulted? What consultation has taken place?
No, I mean, well, look, we've conducted a report and it goes to the portfolio holder. I don't know that it's been shared right here now with every councillor.
Well, I'll help you with that. The answer is it hasn't. There's two members here that are in wards that are affected that have yet to receive this paper or indeed have a conversation around that. So, respectfully, I think that needs to be given regard. Just to add a comment around the virtual system as well, I think this report doesn't give a blended view of how user helpful that has been. I met with members of your own team, Phil, I think it was last month, to talk about some of the issues around the online service, and there was recognition that there were a number of flaws that were being worked through. And we've got a meeting again in January, I think it is, to see where we are with the flaws that were being worked through. Some of that was systems issues, some of that was people's ability to use the system. So I think this report doesn't particularly paint the overall picture on that. I think I've made my point in terms of that. I think the paradox is quite clear, and that seems to be the prevailing view of the committee. Just on the planning front, just picking up on Councillor Raper's point, I just want to clarify. So this is seeking, and sorry, I'll say it in layman's terms, Jonathan, this is seeking to increase fees for what we would call discretional planning fees, i.e. things that people would choose to have, i.e. pre-applications and everything else, and you think that's going to complement and enhance your department's ability to make decisions on determinations in the time period that you have set as a KPI?
Yeah, the statutory fees for planning applications are set by national government, so we can't affect changes to those. The fees that we have the control over are the fees for the pre-application, which are ones we can set ourselves. We believe that increasing those fees will provide increased revenue to provide extra staff so that we can provide a quicker service and improved service. Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, I've got two, well, they're not constituents, but businesses that are either operating or seeking to operate in my patch that are really struggling with determination dates. So you are comfortable with me articulating that this is the silver bullet that will deal with that moving forward?
Yeah, it will be something that will assist us in getting those extra resources in and being able to deal with cases more quickly. Yes, it will be part of that. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm a little bit surprised at that answer because I can't believe everything is just about bums on seats. There has to be about way of working in terms of efficiency in the process and everything else. Has the council done some soul searching in terms of what processes it follows, whether there are parts that are taking too long, don't add any value? I suppose my question is what efficiencies have you looked at in terms of the process of determination rather than just defaulting to increasing headcount?
Okay, so we constantly look at things, the service and what we can do. If there are things we don't need to do, if there are things that could be done better. We've had new staff join us recently from other authorities, so we're working with them to see if there's any opportunities to pick up methods from other authorities that have been used to make things better. So we are constantly reviewing the service, looking at what we can do. Obviously, part of the planning process involves external consultees, getting their advice, and those can be parts of the process that take longer and cause matters outside our control. So we do constantly look at things to see if there are efficiencies that we can make. So yes, it's an ongoing process, but certainly the money or additional revenue would provide additional staff who could make the service quicker.
Councillor Hebb.
I mean, obviously, I'm only a substitute tonight, so I wouldn't want to impress anything about that. Speaking personally, while I've got the opportunity, I do think there probably needs to be a bigger conversation, if it hasn't already happened, around that process. Because for me, it isn't just about headcount, and I'm not a planner, so perhaps that's why it isn't as simple as that. But I'd be interested to hear some of the innovation that the team have just spoke about. I didn't hear any actual tangible examples, but perhaps the committee might want to consider that in the future as a part of the work programme.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. So, going on the back of Councillor Hebb as well, which I totally agree with, I think things need to come back here anyway. Under the 6.3 on the building control, the fees are currently unchanged, and they're going to go straight back to Cabinet in early 2023 to a decision. I actually think that needs to come back to scrutiny as well, as part of not going straight into Cabinet. Mm-hmm. So, as well as everything that we've just been brought up, can this come back at the next meeting, please?
Certainly. I'm going to be proposing another recommendation.
Okay. Okay, and can I also act on the recommendation that ward councillors are consulted? Because none of us have, and I've got a train station, and I think probably Councillor Kelly's got one as well, and so I think that we all need to be consulted before these charges go any further. Thanks.
Councillor Kelly.
Yeah, thank you. It wasn't really a question, it was more of a statement in terms of permits. So at the moment, when permit zones expand, we do have consultation with residents. Where I live in Grays, I'm just outside the permit zone. And before I moved there, there was a vote from residents, and the appetite wasn't there to introduce permits. And that's when it was free. So if you're going to look to expand in the future, which inevitably I think that will happen if we're looking at more built-up areas in Grays, etc. And we've got to bear that in mind, that it's difficult at the moment to introduce permit zones when they're free, let alone if you're going to start introducing charges. So that's something I think we should take note of. And then the second issue is we are looking at major generation in places like Grays, and if we're going to introduce thousands of homes into those areas, there's going to be pressure on the planning side of things by, if you're going to introduce that many homes, ultimately that's then going to put pressure on the permit zone. So it's, a resident could turn up and say, well, look, we don't want these homes here because you're going to then introduce a permit zone and then we're going to get charged for it, which is a valid point. So we just need to be very careful. I'm not not for or against it actually, but it's just from the long term, it's really going to, you had it in Stamford a few years ago. It was some of the residents wanted it, some of them didn't. Imagine trying to pull that one off when it's, there's a charge attached to it. So just to note that it's more than just the fee. It's when you look into the future of expansion, we could head into problems. So it was just a note, not a question. Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
So Councillor Kelly's right. By the time things are going to do, especially on the regeneration area, CPZs will be coming through. However, in order to have CPZs, you need to enforce CPZs, and it's no good having all these popped out all over the place if we haven't got the enforcement team to actually enforce them anyway. So we're in a bit of a conundrum there, but I think that's probably in the future, and we can discuss that later in the future. I mean, currently at the moment, I think everything that we've just spoken about, I don't think this report's ready to go to Cabinet to be agreed anyway, without all those recommendations or those decisions that we've spoke about, Chair. Thanks.
Are there any further comments from committee? Councillor Hebb.
Yeah, can I just clarify what the recommendation is now going to be? Because at the minute it's, sorry, it would help if I'm looking at the right one, wouldn't it? I'm still not looking at the right one, apologies. Note the revised charges and delegated authority. So it sounds as though we need to enhance those somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, the first recommendation is to note and comment on the proposals, which we have done. I'm happy to agree that, but obviously we need to come up with a recommendation that encompasses everything we've just discussed. So from my point of view, the issue I had with parking permits, I would look for something, that the parking permit aspect of the report is pulled until certainly at least further consultation with ward councillors and isn't agreed until that's taken place. And then there were a couple of other things raised by yourself, Councillor Hebb and Councillor Watson, that I don't know if we can just have one recommendation, bolt those onto that and say that, we're not agreeing to those aspects of this report until further consultation with ward councillors has taken place. Councillor Hebb.
I think it's purely on those points. I mean, I'm not opposed to the planning ones. I think it makes sense. They should pay for what, if they're discretionary services, they are discretionary services, not core services. I don't have a fundamental issue with that. In terms of the permit one, I just think there needs to be a challenge back, which is quite robust about engaging with communities that are involved with this. We've heard tonight that at least 2 of us out of the 5 of us sitting here who are in an affected ward haven't had that conversation in any thoroughness before tonight, and therefore go back and then have that conversation with not only us but the community.
Councillor Raper.
Thank you. I've had just to add to that. During the discussion, it was mentioned about councillors in wards with stations, but actually it's really councillors in wards with parking permits. there are other reasons for needing them, not just because of proximity to a station. So I think everyone needs to be consulted. Thank you.
Democratic Kenna?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, listen to the discussion. Would members be happy if you were to perhaps add a recommendation which would state that you would like a consultation into the increase with residents and ward members with regards to the increase of parking permits, so that you've got that information? Is that, I just want to kind of pull out those little bits so we've got a clear recommendation of what it is, because obviously that's the one that seems to be that's causing you the most concern. So
On my part, yeah. I'm happy with that, to bolt that onto the two recommendations we've got here.
Seconded.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go to them and just say agree. We've got 1.1, 1.2, and that additional one that Kenneth read out. I'm not going to read out the first two. Are we, Councillor Watts?
So just the building control ones that at the moment they haven't even been decided. They were going to go directly to cabinet without coming to scrutiny first.
Can we bolt that onto? Yeah. Okay. Are we, before we move on, are we all agreed with that? Agreed. Good stuff. So we shall move on to the next item then. This can be found in your on its own, as it wasn't ready when publicised. I am aware that this still isn't public on the council's website, but I've spoken with Democratic Services, and this will be published tonight. So. It will be publicly available very soon. But I'll go straight to Kevin.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a further update report on Stamford Le Hope, updated from the last time, which was June. Report tries to cover some of those issues that were raised last time around programme and budget. And it gives an oversight of where the scheme is at the moment, procurement update, and funding and budget sort of and programme update. Just in terms of the report structure, I've set out in the background and information in the background for members' review. Just at 2.1 is the purpose of the scheme. I think. It's been a long time in gestation. It was worthwhile just reviewing that. The key thing about Stamford Le Hope is actually a key piece of infrastructure that supports employment and housing growth potentially in Stamford Le Hope, and I think that's something we need to bear in mind. In terms of actually the history of the scheme, at 2.3, I've set out some of the background, which I think was important for members to. I think they raised at the last committee in June about some of the spend. In terms of actually spend prior to March 2020, as I set out in the paper at 2.3, an approach was taken with the development of the station, which was a design and build contract, and it sought to develop the station on the southern portion of the site. Seeking to restrict building across the Mucking Creek and keep the building away from the residential, adjoining residential. And that in its own created technical tensions, not least the issues of flooding, and that's ended up in terms of actually issues around sort of how it could be built. And in that period, the station was demolished and temporary structures put up. Up until the 31st of March, the spend at that point was 6.534411 million in terms of actually spend. At that point, a decision was made to actually to abandon that strategy of delivery, and a new strategy was taken forward. That is where we are at the moment in terms of actually that we're implementing that strategy, which is a two-phase strategy, which was basically split the site into two, into phase one, which was the delivery of the station. Phase two was the delivery of the interchange. I think it's important just to set that out. It sets out in terms of actually what's happened since, in terms of the programming of the scheme. just an important point to raise at 2.6, to expedite delivery of the station and to help accommodate the requirements of the interchange on phase 2. The Days Window site was purchased, and again, just to set the scene, planning approval at 2.7 was granted for phase 1 in July 21, and on the revised design, which we commenced with a fixed price tender process between September 21 and March 22. Report went to July Cabinet in 2021, which sought an additional increase in the council's capital allocation to the scheme, which brought the budget to 29.09 million, which is the working budget for both phases. Progress to date. As I mentioned, we went into a fixed price tender situation on phase 1, which took place and concluded in March 22 with a draft, the selection of Volker Fitzpatrick as the preferred development partner. We've entered into negotiations around that. I should point out, and this is an important point to understand for the committee, is that it was a fixed price contract, and the idea why the fixed price contract was selected was to give price certainty in terms of actually the limited budget. And in many ways, that quite clearly puts there's an activity schedule around that, which places the risk around the contractor to deliver that on time. Through the period of March 2022, we've been actually working. The team have been working with Volkers to actually progress that in terms of actually understanding. I think there's been a number of issues in relation to what's happened in terms of actually delaying that. I think it's been a factor around every single scheme that the council's promoting. There's been inflationary pressures around costs, and that's been a factor behind that. I think there's also been an issue around sort of the ability of the contractor to actually engage in terms of actually the industry, in terms of C2C, about possession rights, and the upshot is that we've not been able to move that forward, although we've both used our best endeavours. What we've seen in terms of actually what Volkers have actually submitted to us is a 50% increase in the tender price. They've actually provided us a programme which is actually adds another year to the programme, with increasing the uncertainty. And again, it's what they're proposing in terms of the changes to the terms would be outside our procurement rules. So, as of Friday, a letter was issued to Volker Rail, a discontinuance letter saying that we'd discontinued the negotiations. So that's where we are in phase 2. Phase 1. In terms of phase 2, which was split from the programme, a considerable amount of design work has been undertaken for phase 2, and it went as far as actually going through a pre-app in 2021, I believe, and issues were identified then about a bus turning area, vehicle movements, and the ability to actually to accommodate all of the requirements in relation to phase 2. Phase 2 has an added complication because the sell-up funding, which attaches itself to this scheme, the 7.5 million, is actually the key outputs for the sell-up funding is actually the delivery of the interchange in part. Obviously the main station itself, but the key issues is around the interchange, the delivery of the bus interchange, and the ability to actually move workers from the station through to DP World, and all the public transport improvements that were projected. In terms of actually, in terms of the budget, just to again, I don't know if this information has been before the committee before, but I've set out in table 1 at 3.8 the funding sources for the 29.09 funding. The majority of that comes from the council. Very little is actually coming from C2C, although Network Rail through the NSIP programme is actually making a contribution. and obviously the other grant, that substantial grant that makes up, is the CELEP Local Growth Fund grant. Spend to date is set out in Table 2, and what I've done is I've split those costs into the historic costs, which were before March 2020, which relate to the previous scheme, which whilst providing information in terms of technical know-how, was effectively closed down whilst the new scheme was the phase development was adopted. Within that, you see the day's window site as a separate acquisition cost, and the cost to date in relation to taking us to where we are in terms of actually securing the planning consent for phase 1, some of the design work for phase 2, and the costs associated with taking us through to the tender. That leaves us in terms of actually as an update is that's 15 just over 15.5 sorry 15.5 million pounds left in the pot to deliver the design for phase 2 and the build programme for phase 1 and 2. In terms of actually, in terms of the programme, because of what's happened with the discontinuance notice, we're now looking again at the programme as a whole, in terms of looking at all the options. I think just points to note in terms of actually the funding for CELEP, to conclude to continue to have that funding applied to the scheme, we need to do a number of things by June next year, and that first one of those is to conclude the design for phase 2, the interchange, and get a cost to it. So we actually know what actually the costs are likely to be, so we can apply those to the budget. We also have to do a revised business case for the whole scheme back to CELEP, just to prove that there is a positive BCR. I should add that the BCR originally on the scheme was somewhere around 9, so it was very, very high, and we're confident that the scheme will still deliver a very high BCI, even with reduced costs. So that's something we need to actually do. In relation to phase 1, there are options that we have. So what I've set down in Table 3 is a proposal how we get to a design stage that delivers a design for phase 2, and that meets the sort of timescales that we can actually do the business case and secure the CELEP money. Now, the decision that we're going through at the moment, because we don't have an answer to that, is actually what do we do around the phase 1, and that's where we're doing a project review at the moment in terms of the options. Now, there are a number of options in front of us. Obviously, those will form part of an internal paper to the directors' board, and they'll be processed through there. And obviously, some subsequently will come back to this committee and cabinet if need be. I've tried to, in the light of the previous overview and scrutinies, I've tried to have put as much information that's been missing in previous reports, but also to give you a statement of where we are.
Well, thank you for presenting the report, Kevin. It is disappointing to hear that negotiations have been discontinued with Volker. Correct me if my thinking here is wrong. I have a question regarding the CELEP money. And as I say, please do correct me if I'm wrong in any of this. So, in order to continue to have that CELEP money, we need to complete the design for phase 2. In order to complete the design for phase 2, I would have thought need to know how much money we have to spend on it, and we have to deliver it. In order to know that, because of the nature of the project being split in 2, we need to know how much phase 1 is going to cost, and in order to know that, we kind of need to have the contract sorted and all of that sort of thing. We've now got no contract, so we don't know, to my understanding, we now don't know how much phase 1 is going to cost, so we can't, then know how much we've got for phase 2, which means how can we do a design for phase 2 and submit to CELEP. So my question is, how in danger are we of losing that CELEP money, if my understanding is correct?
Chairman, that's a very good point. I would add at this stage, we have completed significant design options for phase 2. Unfortunately, they just didn't proceed beyond the pre-app stage in terms of actually finding out what was an acceptable scheme for planning, and also putting costs to that. But we have some high-level costings. So, but what we need to do is refine those down into a scheme which works until we can afford. I would add in that there are further complications as well, or unknowns in terms of the design. Is that the council's purchased the day window site to facilitate the delivery of the interchange in the station, either through construction or the incorporation into the design for the interchange. Now, we don't know how much of that land is going to be required for that, how much would be available for redevelopment. So part of the design work that we're proposing is actually looking at redevelopment opportunities, which actually could yield a receipt which could go back into the scheme and contribute to the budget as the bottom line. So that is a piece of work that will form part of the design package. And indeed, we've already started some engagement with adjoining landowners who have options on sites to see if there's any possibility of that. So that will feed into that process. But you're right. In terms of actually, we have an idea. We've got a budget where we know where we think that the phase 1 station costs are likely to be. I could say that they do sit within the 15 million, but it doesn't actually doesn't allow a lot of wriggle room, I suspect. But you're right. Until we go to a tender, and one of the options is, unlike last time where we had a fixed price tender, we go for a target price tender, which would allow us then to work with a selected partner and actually refine the designs, so therefore we can actually get value in that respect. But again, as I said, Chairman, we're actually working through these options at the moment. We've only literally, that letter of discontinuance went out on Friday, and we've been working behind the scenes in terms of actually putting that paper together.
Thank you for the response, Kevin. I will just quickly push you on that point, though, because we only have until May 2023 to submit this business case review. And I heard a lot of, well, we think this and we hope this in there, but we need sort of firm ideas, don't we, in order to provide this stage 2 design. And I just want to ask again, how at risk is that sell-up money? Because it just doesn't seem like we've got a huge amount of time here. We now don't have a contractor, and it took us 9 months to provide a letter of discontinuation to the first contractor. We've only got 5 months now to do this, so it doesn't seem like a lot of time to me.
Again, Chairman, in our risk register, it's identified as a risk, and it's a high risk. I mean, that's self-evident. I think in terms of actually, we're in close contact with CELAP and the Accountability Board, and the officers there, to be aware of the timescales that have been applied to us, and we're confident that the amount of design work that's been done to date, in terms of actually getting to where we need to, we have a high degree of confidence we can get to that point where we actually have a design and costs, and it will allow us then to start looking at the 2 phases together in terms of actually. But there are a number of options which have yet to be explored, and that's why I'm reluctant to turn around and say, well, there are a number of options that we would look at in how we could deliver that, and as soon as those are developed out, we can bring those back for consideration.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to the committee. Councillor Raper.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Before my question, I'll just say how disappointing this is. You know, we've so far spent £6.5 million and basically achieved the knocking down of a station. My question is, you say about in your key phase project milestones about appointing a designer in December 2022. Has that happened? Are you confident it will happen? Can you perhaps expand on that, please?
Chairman, yeah. What we've done is that we're looking to appoint ACOM, who were actually the consultancy that did all the previous design work. And the whole idea behind that is that they've got the prior knowledge, they've got all the design works, the options that have been undertaken to date. So we wouldn't anticipate that there'd be too much of a lag in relation to, provided, I should caveat, that the staff members are brought back onto it. But the whole idea is that they would actually have, they could actually take up the scheme designs. They've got a number of options which we've already fed back into them, and what works and doesn't work, and how we can accommodate that. We've started a dialogue with our partners in terms of actually making and retesting their scheme requirements. Now, the most obvious one, and getting too much of the detail, is about how do you accommodate a bus on site without having to build sort of complicated structures over rivers, and which is never going to happen because it's too expensive and too technical. So how do we actually to accommodate those type of arrangements in there? So we've started that dialogue. How confident are we? I mean, confident are we? And we've put together a milestone chart based around our dialogue with the contractor and the team who are managing the project.
So are you confident that first milestone will be met in December 22?
So just the appointment of ACOM. We're waiting for a fee proposal back from them at the moment. So yes, they provide the fee proposal.
Still not a guaranteed yes, but hopefully it will be.
Councillor Hebb.
I was going to make a few points. Why do we keep using ACOM?
I think it's a practical response in terms of actually where we are, and I think ACOM are a large, respected consultancy firm. In terms of this, I think what we need to be able to do is set them very clear parameters, design parameters, and what we expect from them in terms of actually, and Councillor Head, probably more effective management of their outputs in terms of actually what they can achieve and what they have achieved. And I think it's about sort of it's about managing that process.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what. Sorry, I don't mean this to be facetious, but I don't really get what the answer is, and all I know is that ACOM seem to have been through this process for many years now, and I'm just not seeing anything different. It's not going to surprise anyone to hear me say that nearly anyone that's had any involvement with this or lives anywhere near it is absolutely sick to the back teeth of the lack of delivery on this project. I've heard. I took a step back and metaphorically and listened to your presentation, and I feel sorry for anyone who takes this over. But I've heard once too often about how things are being looked at, and it will go to directors' board, and if it needs to go to other people, then it will do. And we almost got into the conversation there about potentially like a mezzanine type thing over the river, which is, by the way, how this whole thing started. And a number of us many years ago raised the point that our belief in our ability to deliver major projects as an authority is definitely a concern, and that's manifest in this project. And frankly, I think from an operational, it's always been deemed as an operational matter. How long does it carry on that way? And Chair, and I know why you've brought this to this committee, and I thank you for doing that. I think my question is a bi-monthly meeting with members enough on this project? I've got to be honest with you. Personally, I don't think the answer is yes. I think there needs to be something more weighty, more frequent. I see the point in here about conversations with ward members. In July I was told there would be hoardings up. Then it became August. I thought, oh, I'll ask the question when I have my conversation with them. And then, eventually we got the answer that no, there's been some delays. I've got to be honest with you, I haven't seen any of the breadth of this report, and I just want to make that very clear. There is, for me, a value for money concern here, and it might not be something that gets played out. Hopefully I am wrong, but I imagine that there could be a VFM issue here if we don't get on top of this pretty quickly. Kenna, I'm really sorry to put you on the spot here. What options are available to members of this committee in terms of task and finish groups or something like that to have a look at this project in more detail? And I don't know if you're the right person to ask, and I'm sorry for that. But I have, as a member of the administration, and now not as a member of the administration, and I have heard this conversation for nearly 1,000 days. We need to do something different. And you know, this is a multi-agency issue. You know, like you say, we've got valued partners, whether it be C2C. There's other partners, you know, London Gateway, DP World, who I imagine are equally concerned. And I think we need to get around the table a bit quicker with more members' engagement to make sure that this is delivered. And frankly, give you folks who have inherited this the leverage that you need to progress this and get this done once and for all.
Kenna is going to look at what's available to us. While she's doing that, does anyone want to come in with any comment? Councillor Watson.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for the report. It's probably one of the most transparent reports I've seen, in the fact that at least we've got some tangible figures that we've actually looked at, and it's transparent enough to see just how bad it's going. So thanks for that, which is more than what we had with the A13, and we still don't know what the full cost is there. My serious issue, my serious worry is the SLEP money, and the reason it's more than anything is that I do not think in my hearts of hearts you're going to be able to deliver in time for the SLEP, and if we lose £7.5 million, that will only give you just under £6 million to deliver phase 1 and 2. You've put in your risks that there will be additional resources in place to mitigate if you can't get a full funding package is not available. So I'd like to know what those resources that you will be putting in place to mitigate that will be.
Chair, I think we just identified that there is a requirement for additional sources. We actually, we haven't started that process in terms of actually that engagement, but that's something we'll start looking at in terms of actually whether that's Section 106 or alternative sources. But I think one of the issues we have is actually is engaging with our stakeholders as well in terms of actually this scheme. In terms of one thing I would add, and just in terms of actually giving the members confidence, well not confidence, but it's more about that we have been on a long process with this scheme, and I'm taking over and reviewing it. I am surprised myself in terms of actually where expenditure and management necessarily. But where we are now is that through this process, and it has been torturous in terms of actually, and it's disappointing that we got to the place with Volkers, but we are in a better place in terms of actually design. So we actually have a GRIP 4 design, which is an outline design for the engineering. We actually have a better relationship with C2C about possessions. So therefore, when we actually we set about, and if it is, and I should say, if a decision is to re-tender, then we're in a better position to actually have a lot of information that we can make the tendering process more effective than it has been to date. And that's not a criticism. It's taken too long, in my opinion. But we're in a better position with the information that we have to get a better outcome. But again, the risks associated with that is that along with the delays, the more cost price inflation is going to impinge upon the scheme. So it's a delicate balance, and the point we have picked up is the sell-up funding is critical. If we lose the sell-up funding, then the scheme is significantly challenged. So we are prioritising that, and that's clear from the report. In terms of actually what we do in terms of the re-tendering of phase 1 or delivery of phase 1, we need to look at the options, and obviously we will bring those that detail back to this committee at the right time. But we're not actually in a process where we actually got a defined programme at the moment, because that's still in development.
So Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kevin. I'm pretty sure, and I'd be absolutely shocked if officers are not doing a plan B and putting together a cost on if we didn't get the 7.5 million, or also what exactly the costs are now, because they've inflated from where we originally agreed this programme. So you must have a programme of works with a cost associated with that, because it looks like we're going to run over budget, but we don't know how much. And if you haven't done that piece of work, why not? Because you should be, because this is significantly run over. Also, if we are not in contract, or we've come out of the contract and it's cost us 6 million or whatever it's cost us, what is next the procurement route to get us back into a contract? Quickly.
Again, these are the questions that have been posed internally as well. I think, let me just be clear, in terms of actually delivering phase 1 and phase 2 within the current budget envelope, I think it's going to be a challenge. And I think that's we recognise that. And the question mark is that within that challenge and within the current situation the council is in, with its potential to borrow more, is going to be highly limited going forward, and not just this project, all projects that we're looking at. That's going to be a different challenge. That's why we need to have a conversation with our stakeholders in terms of this scheme, and I look more to the transport stakeholders about those, and those conversations will take place in parallel with the design work.
I'm going to go to Councillor Hebb and then I'll come to Kenna for...
Sorry, I meant to ask this on my last one. Kevin, did you say the pre-app didn't go anywhere for stage 2, phase 2?
So when I say it didn't go anywhere, it didn't translate into a planning application. Does that make sense? I mean, it was undertaken, and as far as I can see from the paperwork, it didn't translate into a further design. It was, yeah, it sort of.
Thank you.
That's what I'm saying in terms of actually the management of sort of the programme. There was an issue there, which is a historic issue. So. I think
it's like a project.
What should I be clarified is that the focus was delivery of phase 1, if that makes sense. So a lot of the resources went into phase 1, and sort of phase 2 sort of was going to follow in behind. To a certain extent, that's probably in hindsight you wouldn't have done that, but that's the point I'm making. They went to a pre-app, hit the buffers in terms of actually lots of issues, and then it didn't get quite resolved, and the focus went to the tender process for phase 1, which is, I can logically see why people wanted to get that up and running, because that was the critical part of actually understanding what the costs are likely to be and what was going to be left for phase 2.
Councillor Head, do you...
Yes, I get it, but I don't. Yeah, I do. I get your response. I do. Did it? So again, you're only going on what you've picked out. It looks as though the projects team have submitted something to planning from a pre-app basis. Is that where it got to, or it was a piece of work that was about to be handed into planning? Sorry, I know I'm getting into detail here, but frankly, I feel the need to.
Well, I mean, it's the pre-app that was submitted was a fairly elaborate scheme, which, as you alluded to, was a scheme built on stilts on a floodplain, which was frankly ridiculous, and had cost implications which would have blown the budget anyway. I'm sorry, but that's my professional opinion, and that's why I think we need to sort of review all those in terms of it in the next design stage and get something which is credible and actually can be delivered.
I'm sure your sentiments and reflections are given equal weighting elsewhere as well on that very basis. Kenneth, sorry, did you manage to have a look at what options there are available to us?
Yes, thank you. So if members were minded to set up a task and finish group, obviously it comes under your remit, so that is something you can do. What would be helpful, obviously, is if we could kind of outline details such as what exactly you want. Obviously, the subject itself is quite defined. What exactly you want to look at, how many members you'd like on the task and finish group, how long you'd like it to run for, because obviously you don't want something that's going to run on and on. Obviously, there's going to be a finish point, and I understand that's probably going to be when either you've got the information that you're looking for or when the project itself is finished. But it's just kind of ironing out those sort of things, and obviously we can put it forward as a recommendation. Equally, it's things like, do you want it just to be members of the ONS committee that's on there? Would you like ward members to be part of the membership? It's kind of ironing out all those sort of details.
Councillor Hebb.
Thanks, Kenna. Perhaps, like you say, perhaps to draft that here is probably not the right thing, but perhaps we should make a recommendation for us to have a relatively urgent discussion around what that would look like, because there is a engagement. I can't remember what it's called. It sounds like a stakeholder group, isn't it? I can't think what it is now, but it's got key stakeholders in the project. There is some engagement with ward members and stuff like that. That's been going on for 3 years. We're here now, and I think we need to give this man and his new team the leverage that we need to. So perhaps if we make a recommendation of having an urgent discussion offline as a committee about shaping something which increases members' oversight into this major project, as well as key stakeholders.
Thank you, Chair. If members were happy to, you could obviously put forward a recommendation for a task and finish group with the details to be ironed out along with yourself and the committee via email.
Councillor Cockshaw.
Yeah, that's a good idea, the task and finish group was discussing that today earlier. But it's over here, I understand there's a programme board there was actually making sure, but it would be really good to have some councillors and ward council oversight to make sure, and the finish would be to make sure the delivery of the select bid that I sit on. And that's what I think. I think it's a really short time to that May, until May and June full council. So you could actually have a task and finish workshop to make sure we're continuously meeting ad hoc to keep progress, monthly meetings or something that people are interested in, to keep the pressure to myself and make sure there is something challenged there, and bringing that back to myself as portfolio holder now of this to make sure this is, it's a very good idea to actually keep, and there's a programme board with no councillors on that. That's the thing, but that programme board could be reporting regularly to the ward councillors and this task and finish group, and the end gate would be the CELEP to make sure that we deliver the processor, and then on a looking brief over stage 1 to planning up to the new committee. But really, that's phase 2 is a critical bit of work there to make sure that 7.5 can stay here. And I'm at the select meeting, and that was it was a very hard meeting that we had over the last 2 meetings in the LEP. Yeah, it would be greatly appreciated from me as a portfolio holder.
Certainly something I can agree to, but I know Councillor Watson wanted to come in, so I'll...
Okay, thank you. So I totally agree, because the thing that I wanted to ask about the task and finish is that the business case needs to, the review of the programme timelines has to go to the Select Accounting Board in March. That's the first one. So that's when then we've got to do that review, costings and programme, see if we're going to meet that. So this task and finish group needs to be over that bit, like a rash, to find out, to ensure that that is being delivered and that is being made. Because then the May one is when we've actually got to go and we've properly and get money, whether we can get it or not. So I don't know how you're going to programme that in, but I would recommend that is our project.
Councillor Hebb.
The other thing, and I don't know the absolute answer to this, the difference between a task and finish and a review panel. Because you've got to think, I don't know what, because like you say, it probably needs to meet in spat, so before March 22, 23 even. You know, it needs to be pretty fast and furious.
Yeah.
And there might be right, we've now got past that point, but we need 4 weeks to do this piece of work. Okay, there's no point meeting each week to be told we're doing this piece of, you know what I mean? So I don't know, sorry. I don't know.
Kenna?
Sorry, it would mean that the difference between a task and finish group and a working group is that a task and finish group is like a mini committee. So it would have, you'd have like a set, almost like a term of reference. So everything is set. So you'd have the amount of members you'd have, it'll be balanced. Everything would be basically a mini committee. A working group, there's a little bit more flexibility in that we could, for example, with agendas, we have to publish agendas within 5 working days. With a working group, you don't necessarily have a publication as much as we would obviously follow because it's process, but they could be agendas could be emailed out to members. If you needed to hold meetings quite quickly, you could hold them via Teams. So there's obviously the more flexibility with a working group rather than a task and finish group.
We'll go to Councillor Watson, then Councillor Cox.
Thank you. Probably go for a working group. It's a lot more snappier. And the other thing as well is that means that you will have a timeline on when these programmes are going to be, when you've done the programme with the costings. And as soon as you've done that, within 2 or 3 days, that working group needs to get together and view that and set that through with you.
Yes, Chairman. I think the working group would give you the flexibility, because what we could do is we could program that into our milestones. So we say, well, we need it by then because. And we could share that information as well prior to that, and make sure people.
Councillors on the project board. Yeah, it's very much like that delivery timescale, but it's the terms of reference I think we can that I would appreciate. That a working group would be much easier and it'd be ad hoc, but and then it can have multiple meetings to actually deliver a timeline, and not just waiting for these certain dates, but at the chair's behest, these working group will require information and just keep on going to make sure there's an elected person's per body looking at this regularly, more than ad hoc here, or more than me meeting it every 2 weeks to just ask a question. I think it'd be very helpful then to feed into me to make sure we've and making sure it comes back to this committee and the portfolio holder. Yeah.
Okay. Before we go on to the recommendations, are there actually any further questions on this report here tonight from anyone? No. Okay. Well, then we'll go to the recommendations. I've got none on here. Oh, there we go. So the recommendation can be found on the first page, 1.1. I'm not going to read it out because it's just a note and comment which we've done. That's agreed. The next recommendation is, as discussed, that a working group will be formed, and outside this committee, members all discuss and put it together. Are we all happy with that? Yeah. Good stuff.
Sorry, Chair. Who will? This is obviously an internal matter, probably not for the meeting. But who would lead that dialogue? Would that be through Dem Services? Yeah. Thank you, Kenna. Sorry, but we do need to do this.
If you have, yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the last item of the agenda, which is the work programme, and it can be found on page 33. We do have a lot of items on the February instalment, but we did discuss at the last meeting holding an extraordinary one in January. Ken, I know you've got a couple of dates over to me. I'm okay with either of them. Have you got a specific one we can?
I think one of the dates was the 26th of January. I think that's right. I think that's a Thursday. But I can email members just to check availability.
Yeah, if we email around
and then get that confirmed.
Check availability. So that will be in January. Before we go, though, I just want to sort of nail down a few of the reports that will be had at January. I would be looking at Councillor Maney's portfolio holder report coming in January, and then east-facing slips in January as well. There are a couple there. Have we got? I will have a couple more, but unless there are any suggestions right now, I'll just talk to Democratic Service.
Tilbury Town Fund? Maybe?
The Tilbury Town, yeah, the Tilbury Town.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have an answer is yet.
If you don't, put it back to February. All right.
I don't know when the answer is, do you?
So we've not had a response from the department yet.
And we won't by the end of January, no.
We'd hope to have a response, before in this calendar year, but there's no guarantees of that because.
See how the next few weeks.
We'll leave it on there, and then I'll have a word with Democratic Services and add a couple. Was there one that you wanted, Council Head?
Well, I probably won't be on the committee because I'm only subbing tonight. But
you're still a member of the committee.
Oh, thank you. No, I was just thinking about that planning piece that we was talking about earlier, in terms of the efficiencies and stuff that the team were looking at in terms of ensuring that the process is followed.
Right, okay.
And expedited, because there's a number of residents and, well, I keep saying residents, businesses that I sort of get approached by, because obviously there's quite a bit of industry in my patch, about delayed determinations, to the point that we're talking not months, we're talking years. So,
right. Okay. Anything else? No. All right. Well, we can catch up after this. Yeah. Okay. Well, if that's that then, and there's nothing further, I shall close this evening's meeting, and hope everyone gets home all right.